Hey everyone, this is Jill. Today, Chris and I are talking with Cassie Christopher about emotional eating during the COVID-19 crisis. I know this is not our normal schedule, but we thought it was important to get this out. Join us for this extra special episode. Welcome to episode 55 of the Fit Strong Women Over 50 podcast.
Hi, I'm Chris. Our podcast is for the Becoming Ellie community. If you're new to our podcast, welcome. We named our community Becoming Ellie because Ellie is the Norse goddess of aging.
And I'm Jill. Our regular listeners know the legend. Ellie beat Thor in a wrestling match.
Yes, and that inspired Jill and I because we wanted to become and stay fit and strong as we age, just like Ellie.
We are recording this the last day of March 2020 in the midst of the stay-at-home stages of the coronavirus pandemic, COVID-19.
Many people are for the first time working from home and finding that the refrigerator makes a tempting coworker. While I've been working from home for many years, being more anxious and nervous now about the uncertainty has me walking into the kitchen much more often than usual.
Yeah, and I think that many of us, besides being anxious and nervous, are also probably feeling a little more depressed and frightened by everything that's going on.
Yeah, I'm seeing a lot of jokes on social media, and at this point, I think a lot of the jokes are to try to relieve the tension, and the lightheartedness is masking the true feelings. You know, I see memes with the before and after photos, and most of them involve people gaining a lot of weight. And that just seems a little too close to home for me right now.
Yeah. So we thought this would be an excellent time to talk about emotional eating.
Cassie Christopher is our guest expert today on Fit Strong Women Over 50 podcast.
She is a registered dietitian who has helped hundreds of women overcome emotional eating so they can focus on the people and things that are really important to them. With a background in using genetics and lab data for chronic disease prevention, Cassie is also a behavior change expert who knows what it takes to make changes that will last.
Let's go to the podcast.
Welcome, Cassie. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I'm looking forward to connecting with you today.
You know, I think many of us have an idea about what is emotional eating, but I'd like to start off by asking you, what is the definition of emotional eating?
Yeah, emotional eating, I think of it more of what it's not. It's not eating because you are physiologically hungry. It's, that physiologic where your stomach is rumbling and it's been a while since you ate and you need to eat for energy, for physical nourishment, is not emotional eating, but rather when you're eating when you're not hungry because of feelings, that is emotional eating. And one thing to know is emotional eating in itself is not a bad thing. I mean, we might be annoyed with it because, like you mentioned, those memes of people who've gained weight because of some emotional eating. But, Thanksgiving is emotional eating. We're eating because we're happy, because we're celebrating with people. So it's not all bad. And I think that's important to notice because, emotional eating, we do it because it's comforting. We do it because it works. Actually, when you eat, it sends a signal in your brain. You get some dopamine, which is the reward pathway in your brain. And so your body is saying, yes, this is good. Keep doing this when you eat, and that can feel really good when you're feeling upset.
So are there different emotions that cause people to want to eat?
Yeah, I think, for each of us, it can be unique, to each person. But in general, I think what a lot of people are experiencing with COVID-19 are the fear, the stress, the overwhelm, and those things. Instead of coping with those feelings in other ways, people might be using food as a coping mechanism. And, again, the reason that people do that is because it does work. It does make people feel better. And yet maybe you can relate with this. If you engage in emotional eating all the time or as your only coping mechanism, that might start to interfere with some of your health goals.
Yeah, I can understand that. I know when I start feeling anxious and stressed or depressed, there are certain foods that I'm looking for. I'll open up the refrigerator and look through everything. And the type of food that I'm looking for is not usually lettuce or celery or water or anything that's usually considered healthy. In your experience, Cassie, are there certain foods that we crave?
Yeah, research suggests that when the stress hormone cortisol, so that fight or flight hormone kicks in, that people will actually reach for higher sugar foods, higher fat foods. So that might be like the candy, the chocolate. There's fat in things like chips or, some crunchier foods maybe. So those tend to be the sweet, salty, crunchy, tend to be, in my experience, what people go for, and research supports that as well.
That makes sense. I always think of it as being like the real heavy carb kind of things, but that would go with the heavy sugars, the higher sugar content, I guess. So
exactly. Yeah. Cake, is sugar. Delicious.
Is there a difference between doing emotional eating sometimes and having an eating disorder, and where do you distinguish between the two?
That's a really, really great question. And I think emotionally eating occasionally is normal. And so, especially during this time, probably I would guess most of your listeners are going to feel like, yeah, I am doing some emotional eating, and that's normal. But what isn't normal or helpful, like you mentioned, are eating disorders. And that can be when people start to feel a lot of anxiety around food, or, with binge eating, it might look like someone eating a very, very large quantity of food and then, feeling very bad about it and getting into some sort of spiral. And so likely if someone is experiencing those symptoms now, it's probably something that's not brand new. Probably most of your listeners have dealt with this, in the past. And this might be a time to reach out and get help. That's a really great point. So if someone's finding that this emotional eating is causing them to feel very, very sick, because they've eaten such large quantities, or to feel really anxious about food or their body, then that's a great time to reach out to a mental health counselor. And a lot of people are doing, Zoom or other remote meetings. So people can still get help there.
Oh, good point.
And the National Eating Disorders Association, that's NEDA. That's a really great resource to go type into Google. And there's a lot of good information for how to get help and some hotlines there as well.
Okay, thank you. We'll add that into our show notes too.
As a registered dietitian and a health coach who specializes in helping those with emotional eating, how do you help women overcome a fixation on eating and change the focus to things that really matter to them?
Yeah, I think I love that question. And I think the first step there is having people define for themselves what really matters. I mentioned working with people on behavior change, and, I found if people want to be motivated enough to change their behavior, to do something new, that they need to be tapped into why it's important. It may be that you want to lower your heart disease risk so you can, be around to see your grandchildren graduate from high school, or you want to do something really exciting like hike Machu Picchu. Whatever it may be, having those goals that you care about and getting in line with your own core values can be a great place to get motivation to change from. So that's really the first step, is defining what are those dreams? What is it that you want to do, to get a clearer picture of that?
Yeah, to really focus on the why you want to achieve something. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Well, I'm glad to hear that's resonating with you, because, knowing why something's important to you and I often talk to people and they might say like the why is to fit into smaller clothes or to look better in a, bathing suit. And I think that's something we can all resonate with. Like, yeah, I want that too. But in my experience, that often isn't enough of a reason, or there's just a lot of mental drama that comes along with those kinds of goals that they maybe aren't very motivating for people. So reaching into something more emotional can often be helpful.
Right. That's what we've found when we talk to different people that want to be fit and strong. There's some really important underlying reasons why. I guess that it's the same with emotional eating. You have to figure out why you don't want to do that. Does that make sense with what you've said?
Exactly. That's exactly what I'm saying. Whether it be eating emotionally less, because again, you're never going to not eat emotionally. That would be a sad life. Okay. But it's eating emotionally in a way that aligns with your health goals, right?
Gotcha. Okay.
Or your goals in general. Say you love connecting with people. Well, then don't skip the birthday cake, right? That's a form of connection with other people. Does that make sense? Some emotional eating is you're going to do it and it's okay.
Since we're in the midst of the COVID-19 crisis and many of us are having to stay at home, the birthday cake made me think of this. Is so instead of sharing the birthday cake with someone, you could be sitting at home eating it. What advice do you have for us on avoiding some of this emotional eating while we're at home with a lot of food nearby?
Yeah. Isn't that the interesting piece of this is people are at home feeling intense emotions, often with stocked pantries, right. In many cases. So it makes it more difficult, certainly. And I would say the advice there, if it's your birthday and you don't get to celebrate with your friends and you're feeling upset about it, you care about connection, and so you want to emotionally eat. What I would say there is, what's the emotional root? Is eating cake by yourself going to provide you the connection that you're looking for? The answer to that is no. When you're done eating your cake, you're still going to be lonely and sad about your birthday.
Cassie, I have to interrupt you because you probably don't realize, but yesterday was my birthday.
Happy birthday. And also, I'm sorry.
I'm really relating to all this birthday cake stuff, but I told my husband because he wanted to make me a cake.
Did you have any cake?
No. He wanted to make me a cake for my birthday, and I'm like, no cake or any of those things because he's been baking bread, and to me, that's like as hard as birthday cake to resist because it's such a comfort food. But it's so funny that you're talking about birthdays and mine was yesterday. Just kind of enjoyed a good meal. It is difficult when you can't celebrate in the way you want, or, you have so much of this, I don't want to say stockpiled food, but, we're prepared for the duration here. Mm-hmm. I keep watching cooking shows, which is not the right thing either. But do you have any advice for us to avoid that emotional eating when there's all this food around?
Yeah. And so the first piece, as I alluded to, is checking in with how you're feeling in the moment. So, if you want to go to the kitchen for the, 13th time today, to take a moment and pause and check in and say, am I physically hungry? You feel that in your stomach. You feel that kind of below your chest. You're a little tired. You need some nourishment, some calories, some energy. Are you physically hungry? If the answer is no, then what emotion are you feeling? What is it that you need? Checking in with yourself. If it's, and I'll use our birthday example again, if you don't mind. If it's your birthday and you're bummed that you're missing out on other people and you need connection, then it's time to get creative about how to connect with other people. Or maybe you notice that you're stressed out because you're sitting here trying to figure out new technology, working from home, and every button you push is wrong. And, there's been some funny and unfortunate videos of people messing up using some of this technology. If you're stressed, then it's like, okay, is emotionally eating going to help with that stress? Maybe a little bit, right? Like we talked about how you get the brain, the dopamine, the reward pathway, but in the grand scheme of things, it's not. So how can you address the stress in that moment. Maybe for you, that's going for a walk, or that's putting on some relaxing spa music. I don't know why, but I like the spa music. It makes me feel relaxed. Whatever it may be for you in the moment, how can you care for yourself, care for that feeling? And that's an in the moment strategy. And I've got some, more preventative strategies as well.
Good. Our listeners tend to be women over 50, and some of us live with our spouses with no children at home. Others live in multi-generational houses, and some of us live alone. How do those situations change things when it comes to emotional eating?
I think that the thing you are feeling, the emotion itself, may be different in those various circumstances, and there may be unique challenges each, living situation provides, but that basic checking in with yourself and caring for yourself for that root need is going to be the same across any age even. It just may be that if you need peace and quiet and you have a house full of people, right, that's harder to come by. It may take some creativity and purchasing some noise canceling headphones online or whatever it may be. But so yeah, it's really how to solve the problem, but the root issue is the same across all life stages and phases. More things that people can do to help prevent emotional eating is to eat balanced meals and snacks regularly. And so this is where I recommend people eat about every 4 hours, and they have a meal that includes some protein and some fiber. That's going to keep blood sugar balanced. That's going to keep stress hormones balanced. And so people may actually feel less of a need to emotionally eat when they're nourishing their body in that way.
So this is not the time to decide, hey, well, I'm sitting here with nothing to do. I'm going to take up intermittent fasting.
Probably not.
Okay.
Probably not, because you can't go anywhere. Like, you are stuck at home, 15 feet from your refrigerator. And so really focusing on nourishing yourself is probably going to be a winning strategy over any sort of deprivation for sure.
Okay, that makes sense. If you're eating every 4 hours or so, you're not going to be famished. And so you then could be a little more in control, I guess.
Exactly. The longer that you've gone from eating, you actually have appetite hormones that are building up in your body, telling your brain, you need to eat, you need to eat. You need to eat. It gets louder and louder and more persistent as those appetite hormones build up. And so eating regularly and planning that in advance is going to help. And the other thing is planning a nice, nourishing snack like that for times when you are prone to emotionally eat can also be really helpful.
So do you have any advice for those? I know we sort of talked about the different living situations, but those people who are living with children, even if they're adult children, let's just talk about children, teenagers, whatever, because it seems to me that when you're shopping for more people, particularly younger people, that you might have more, snacks, that kind of thing, treats, and that may end up being a bit more of a problem for some.
Yeah.
Any advice on that?
That's a great point. And that is where that planning that I mentioned really comes in, because if you know that you have something healthy put together for you to enjoy in, let's say in 2 more hours or 4 more hours or whatever, and you know that you're not hungry, you are going to feel less of a reason to reach for the less healthy snacks that might be around for other members of your family. Other strategies that work are things like out of sight, out of mind.
Yeah.
If you can, but of course you can't always. And then also letting yourself, so I think there's a balance between engaging in occasional emotional eating. If everyone in your family is having Oreo cookies, eat an Oreo cookie with them, connect with them, and give yourself permission to really eat that cookie and enjoy it, right? This is the time I'm eating cookies and I'm enjoying them. And that mentally is going to, give less guilt and less shame because you've given yourself permission to do it. And so what I often see happening to people is they have one cookie and then it's the all or nothing thinking. Well, I had the one cookie. I blew it for today. I'm just going to have the whole sleeve.
It's funny that you would say that. I just saw something online that said, I'm not sure how many cookies it takes to be happy, but I found out that it's not 27.
That's a really great point.
But, I'm sitting here thinking, I usually do a pretty good job of sticking to my macros, getting a balance between protein and carbs and fat. But right now I'm struggling with that. And I'm assuming many of us have the same problem. Maybe I'm thinking about it wrong, but is it okay to have a cheat meal or a cheat day? Or is that the wrong way to think about it?
I think that the concept itself is great. Give yourself permission to enjoy the things you like, but rather than thinking of it as a cheat from your normal way of life, think of it as a treat that you get to enjoy to nourish yourself in some way, either, to connect with others or to, for your own mental health or because you love this and it reminds you of when you were a kid and that makes you feel good, right? Because emotional eating isn't a cheat. It's normal. In many ways, it can be a good thing. And so rather than thinking it of a cheat, just thinking of it as, normal and maybe also realizing that during COVID-19, when we are stuck at home, you're going to engage in a little bit more emotional eating. And that's okay.
Good. Thank you.
That makes sense. Because I live alone, I have control over what I bring into my house, which means I don't have to bring in Oreos because I just don't buy them at the grocery store and then they're not here.
Sure.
But I have noticed that I'm buying things that I don't normally eat. And I have a refrigerator with my spinach and my dandelion greens in there. But I find that I'm really eating the potatoes and I'm adding some bread and butter to my meals. And it's not that I'm eating a horrible thing, but I am definitely adding the potatoes and cheese. Does this go back to what you were saying about wanting the cortisol and eating higher sugars and fats? Is that what I'm experiencing?
Yeah, that, and I'm guessing that those are foods you ate a lot as a kid growing up.
Probably, yes. Yes,
yeah.
Though I did.
Okay.
Yeah, but I hadn't thought of that. But you're right. Bread, certainly we ate.
Yeah, these childhood patterns and, things that were modeled for you growing up, those are likely to come back up in times of a lot of stress. And so, understanding that can be normal to revert back to some old patterns. It can be normal to do some emotional eating, that there's some biology making this happen. What I hope that does for people is provide some room for self-compassion for all of this, to recognize that that's okay, that's normal, but these prevention strategies that we've talked about can help in the sense of making sure you're nourished throughout the day. When you do enjoy some emotional eating, to really give yourself permission to engage in it, enjoy the people around you, if that's part of it, to tap into what's really going on for you. And then also going back to the beginning of our conversation where we talked about core values, and this might be something, or your motivation, what's important to you. This might be something even when you're at the grocery store, as you're putting things in your cart, you can ask yourself, how does this food align with what's important to me and what I want for life, what my goals are? And that can help with the motivation of avoiding things that you don't necessarily want in your day.
Okay. I have another question, actually. So we've talked about people being stuck at home and eating, but there's also a whole contingent of people who are having to go out and work very hard and having a lot of stress from that. And I'm going to guess that people are coming home and they're not having the luxury of sitting around thinking, well, what foods am I going to make today? That they're just trying to grab something quickly or worrying about their family or whatever. What advice for those people? Because that's a completely different problem, right. It seems to me.
Yeah, it is. The idea of too much time on your hands versus not enough time.
Right.
I think that this one principle still applies, and that's planning as much as possible. possible. If you're able to think in advance about foods you can have on hand and make sure you have those. But really, then it's just knowing what are some quick options. Canned items a lot of times tend to be quick in terms of protein sources. So thinking things like canned tuna or even canned chicken or beans, those can be quick on-the-go options, as well as something like a hard-boiled egg, keeping those around. And then pairing that protein source with a high-fiber source like a fruit or a vegetable or a whole grain, or maybe, all of them. Those things are not too difficult to keep on hand. You can grab an apple, or you can even buy, if you have to, pre-chopped vegetables or baby carrots. It doesn't have to be an elaborate meal, but that protein and fiber combo is what is going to keep those hormones balanced to nourish your body.
You've mentioned that now a couple of times, the protein and fiber. So that would be you said egg or chicken or tuna, beans, and then something with fiber. So that's a vegetable, fruit, I guess a whole grain.
Yeah, that is the combo that helps to balance your blood sugar, because if your blood sugar goes too low, like what happens if you don't eat frequently enough, or if you have maybe like a high sugar food, then soon after you can expect your blood sugar to go low. And that causes that stress hormone cortisol to rise. And we already have so much stress, right? We don't need more because of our, eating patterns.
Well, I just keep thinking of all the emotions right now. It's got to be a prime time for emotional eating, between feeling, at least how I've felt in the last few weeks, sad or angry, confused, scared, lonely, frustrated, bored, or just tired. Obviously, not giving in to emotional eating is not really that simple. The lack of control, I think, over what's going on. I feel like I don't have a lot of control with things. Mm-hmm. You mentioned planning and having a balance between protein and fiber. Are there other ways that we can gain control and maybe not have the emotional eating take over in a bad way?
And I think that is each person's, coping mechanism and frame of reference. For me, that's been attending my virtual church services and prayer, and it's been using the Headspace app to meditate and help my mind focus on one thing rather than all the things. I think what you're speaking to is really overall emotional wellness and how people can care for themselves best at this time. And I think figuring out how you feel can give some insight onto how to address it.
Yeah, I think that's a key for me. And I'm glad you mentioned the Headspace app, because I've really been leaning on that a lot recently. It's a free app that you can download, and it has more than just meditation on it. It has bedtime stories like read to you, which I find really helpful for when I lay down and have trouble going to sleep. Thank you.
I'm sorry, it has what that is read, did you say?
Bedtime stories like, fairy tales kind of things that my mom would read to me when I was going to sleep at night when I was a little kid.
Right.
And it's very relaxing and comforting, and some of the people on that app have the best voices.
They do.
Are calming. You know what I'm talking about, right?
I do. I 100% do. Yeah. And I haven't tried it yet, but they even have a section for mindful movement. And I know that that's something your community really enjoys. And, research suggests that moving your body and getting your heart rate up, that can work in some cases just as well as, antidepressant. Mm-hmm. So I'm not saying stop taking your antidepressants. Don't mishear me, but know that making sure that you're able to continue to get that movement in, if it's something that helps you, is going to be important.
What if I say, I don't care. I'll deal with this all later?
That's a choice someone can make, and they will likely have consequences for it. If someone says, I know I need to deal with my emotions, but I'll figure it out later, Well, there's that emotional piece for one of not having a healthy outlet and way to deal with the emotions. And then there's the impact on health as well, that, a lot of these foods that we tend toward aren't necessarily good for our bodies. And so what folks often find when they really give in to emotional eating is, less energy. Overall, not being able to cope with those emotions quite as well. And then there's all the bad feelings, the guilt and the shame and the feeling bad about oneself that can come along with it too, just as a result of, how our culture views that kind of activity.
Right. Well, yeah.
So not reaching health goals, not feeling great about yourself, but really the one that a lot of people mention to me is just no energy, because those hormones aren't balanced. There's a lot of extra cortisol, a lot of that extra stress hormone on board, and that can really just take away and make you feel bad.
I'm also thinking that, one of the things for women over 50 is that as you get older, it gets harder and harder to lose weight. So if you say, I don't really care and I'm going to eat what I want, that leads you down to that you gain some weight. But then later you do, so you have then the added trauma of now I'm 10 pounds overweight and it's a challenge to get rid of it.
Yeah, I think it's not only harder to lose weight, it's easier to gain weight.
Well, that's true too.
Yeah, and that's where helping to balance your hormones, with the eating regularly and eating nourishing meals regularly can have some added benefits in terms of, making you feel full so you don't have to eat all the time. And just providing that extra physiologic boost to really make people feel good and maybe stop some weight gain.
Is this the time to start a new habit? Talking about the meditation made me think of that.
It could be. Yeah. I love that idea. I think if people, look inward as they're trying to discover what they're feeling, it might be that they need to take care of themselves in a different way. And so maybe it's making time for meditation or, journaling or prayer or calling your sister, right? Or whatever it may be. Right. Or, of course, I'm going to advocate for eating regularly. You heard me say it again. That could be a great new habit. And just as we discussed at the beginning, connecting into your motivation and your reasons why is a great thing to help someone start that habit.
Cassie, I have to ask you, what is your feeling on breakfast? Because I know some people like to put off breakfast and have their first meal at around noon of the day. Are you more of a breakfast person?
In terms of eating regularly and balancing hormones, I am more of a breakfast person. And yet, this is where I have to recognize that everyone is different and everyone is the expert on themselves. And so, if someone usually does, the intermittent fasting and starts breakfast later, but finds they're eating a lot of emotion, if they're doing a lot of emotional eating or they're, tempted all the time, well, maybe it's time to put that intermittent fasting on hold and try more regular meals to see if it works. I mean, it's all an experiment, right? And, worst case scenario, go back to eating your first meal at noon.
For some people, it may be that if they say, well, I'm not eating until noon or whatever time, that then they don't do the emotional eating because it's not their time to eat yet.
Right. Yeah. Right. And for some people, telling themselves they're not going to do something like plays even stranger mind games, and so then they want to do it all the more, which is normal and okay. But maybe that person is not a great fit for a late first meal.
Yeah. So maybe at this point where things are so upside down with the way things are, it's a good time to make some changes. Make changes that last. Good eating habits.
I think it definitely depends on the change. If the change is to care for yourself, nourish yourself, to be kind to yourself, then I'd say that's great. If the change makes you not feel like you're being nice to yourself or deprives you in any way, now is not the time.
Gotcha. Good.
That's good advice, just to be kind to yourself.
Yeah, I think so often we're really tough on ourselves, more tough on ourselves than we are on each other or our friends. One of the other women that we interviewed for this podcast, she teaches tennis. She said that you'll find out right away what's going on in their heads because they speak out loud to themselves like, oh, that was terrible, saying things that are not kind to themselves. And since she said that, I've tried to be more aware of internally how I'm talking to myself. You're reminding me again, Cassie, that's so important. That's so important to have compassion for yourself.
Indeed. And, that's something I talk to people about as well all the time is the thoughts going on in your head. I mentioned earlier that all or nothing thinking where it's like, well, I already had a couple Oreos, so now I'm going to eat the sleeve. That is a form of some unhelpful thought patterns. Being mean to yourself is another form of that. And the first step is noticing it's happening, because so often with our thoughts, unless we have the advantage of yelling it out on a tennis court to discover it,
right,
they can go undetected. So keeping an eye on that is another helpful strategy in this time.
Yeah.
Good advice.
So what role does exercise play in modifying emotional eating?
Yeah, I think exercise is a great tool for that self-care, is a great tool to help combat some of the cortisol, some of that stress hormone, that fight or flight feeling. Exercise can help calm down the nervous system. And also exercise can help keep your brain healthy, and in this time we're talking about thoughts and we're talking about how people feel, that brain health is important as well. And so I think if you can exercise with the mentality that is nourishing to you, it's helping you meet your goals, that is going to help with emotional eating. However, and I'm sure you can relate with this, or you've heard stories of other people where there's research also to back this up, that when people exercise in a way that they don't enjoy, or that they're mentally framing it as like something they have to do but they don't want to do, or even punishment, exercise becomes a negative thing, and they eat a snack after they exercise, the people who didn't like exercising are going to be more likely to have unhealthy, higher calorie, more emotional eating type snacks. And I think it's because they're trying to reward themselves for what they just did. So it's really about how people are framing exercise in their mind as to whether or not it is helpful for emotional eating.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
That's interesting. So you really do need to find some exercise that you love that is a treat. Not,
yes,
oh, I've got to go do push-ups. That's one that I don't particularly like, so that's what I
You do some push-ups and then you're in there like eating some of that homemade bread.
Yeah. I go find the Girl Scout cookies that are hiding in the back of the freezer. Right.
So you've experienced this even.
Yeah. But yeah, you've heard people say that too, oh yeah, I can hardly wait till this is over. But there's so many times where I can relate to feeling that dopamine after the exercise. Right now, being at home and not having the chance to get out as much because the weather has been a little off lately. I'm really looking forward to the better weather this week. I hope it happens so that I can be outside more. Because you're right, exercise that you love. The gardening, I'm looking forward to getting some gardening done, which isn't heavy exercise, but it's steady, and I can keep doing it for a long time, and I just really enjoy that.
I'm missing the gym.
Yeah.
It's not the same, and so, that's a good thing to know about yourself, just because you may have to do some exercises that you don't, want to throw your fist in the air and scream, yeah, it's time. And it's good to know and watch, like, how does that impact your behavior later? And if you're, eating regularly and maybe allowing a little emotional eating as well, right? Just because of everything, it doesn't have to derail your health goals. But yeah, in general, finding things that you like doing is going to help.
You have any recommendations about sleep?
Yeah, it's so interesting. that you mentioned that, and I think this is another one where when people are feeling really anxious or stressed, they might have trouble sleeping. People in general require 7 to 9 hours of sleep a night, and that's like 95% of people. And if you're not getting that sleep, research suggests for every hour of sleep that you miss out on, and I can't remember the exact figure, but will eat a certain amount of extra calories. So you may eat more than you need. Great. And in terms of general healthy living and caring for yourself, sleep is definitely something you can do. But also, I'm sure we can all relate that our emotions just feel even harder to stay on top of when we're sleep deprived.
Right.
So another case for getting more sleep, if there ever was one, but that certainly can be a way that someone can support themselves right now.
Is there anything we haven't covered that you want to share with us?
I don't think so. I really just being nice to yourself, expecting some emotional eating and being okay with that, and then practicing some of these other strategies that we have discussed are the best way forward in this difficult time.
That's great. If people wanted to follow you online, where could they find you?
I'm on Facebook, Cassie Christopher RD. You can search for that. And then I have also a free guide to help people balance their hormones and cut emotional eating down. And you can get that at cassiechristopher.net/free. And you spell my name CassieChristopher.net/free. And again, that's a free guide to help people balance their hormones so they're not emotionally eating as much.
Thank you. That's great.
Yeah.
Yeah, we really appreciate your time today, Cassie, and all these wonderful strategies to help avoid emotional eating, or at least whatever emotional eating we do decide that we're going to partake in, we don't go overboard. That's been really wonderful talking with you.
Thank you. You as well.
Yes, thank you so much.
So we'll look forward to talking again. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye. So, hey, I hope you enjoyed this talk about emotional eating, and feel free to let us know what you're doing to take care of yourself during the COVID-19 crisis. Thanks. See you next time.